I'm Csaba Csere with Car and Driver, and I'm behind the wheel of a 2012 Fisker Karma. The Karma is a $100,000 plug-in hybrid, and we're here with it in Beverly Hills, this car's natural habitat, but we're going to rig it out all over Southern California today. The Karma is the first product of Fisker Automotive, a company that was founded in 2007 by Henrik Fisker. Fisker is a well-known designer responsible for the Aston Martin DB9 and the BMW Z8, and the Karma is the first car he's produced in his own car company. But rather than have you hear me talk about the car, we're going to go talk to Henrik himself, and you can get the story straight from the horse's mouth. What was the idea when you were creating the Karma? What was your overall concept in general?
So when we started Fisker Automotive, it was really, the idea was about it has to be something different than just a conventional V8 powered four-door sedan, because there's plenty of those with great brand names. Also, the concept about the company was about creating an environmental friendly lifestyle brand. So it's not just about the powertrain, it's about the solar roof, it's about the reclaimed wood. So there was many aspects of it where we felt in this market, we can set ourselves apart by being a company that only makes electric vehicles with extended range. They're gorgeous looking, they're fun to drive, and they have a whole environmental friendly aspect around them with all these parts.
Can you take us through some of the elements that gives this car its muscularity and its sexiness?
Yeah. Well, we started out with, first of all, a very long wheelbase. That was somewhat driven by the drivetrain because we got a gasoline engine with a generator, so it gives a pretty long hood. From proportions, to get the proportions right, we needed really big wheels on the car. So this is the only four-door sedan in the world with standard 22-inch wheels. So that, of course, gives a certain sculpture. Then the other element was the widest point of the car is actually the fender edge, not the body in the center of the car. So that means it's almost like the wheels are pulled out, and it gives it that muscularity. The other point was, because we have a relatively small engine for this big car in the front, we could actually lower the hood. So you'll notice that, first of all, when you look outside the car, you can actually see the front fenders. So that was another part that kind of gives it that voluptuous sculptural feeling. Short front overhang, very short rear overhang for a four-door sedan, and then some very big haunches at the back. The greenhouse is fairly low. The car is very low. I don't think there's rarely any four-door sedan. There's maybe one out there that's as low as this car. So that's why when you drive the car, we didn't have to stiffen the suspension to the point where it becomes uncomfortable to go fast around corners. So when you drive it, you'll feel that it's fairly comfortable, despite when you go around corners, it doesn't have a lot of body roll.
Now this low roofline looks terrific, but you do pay for it a little bit in interior space. Was that a concern, or do you obviously thought it was worth the trade-off?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think as a new car company, you have to create an icon. However, I wanted to have a little bit more usability than a two-door coupe, which is why we have four doors. You can still get in the back. So it sort of is somewhere between a coupe and a four-door sports sedan. And yes, it was a trade-off, but I think the beauty is worth it. We just wanted to set a whole new direction. As a new car company, you know, there's no reason for us to go and emulate what everybody else is doing because they're already doing it. We wanted to do something that was completely different. It's a unique, exclusive experience that you can't get everywhere else, and they can afford that experience.
Well, this is a spectacular looking car, and when you see it on a public road with conventional cars and minivans and pickup trucks, it's like an alien being. You know, this is like some supermodel showing up at a laundromat with the regular housewives. It's just in a different league from most normal cars. Last night the Karma was on the charger, so we're starting out with a full battery. Initially it said 47 miles of battery alone, and we've got almost 3/4 of a tank of gas, so it's over 250 miles on that as well. Now in this mode, where we start out with a full battery charge, the Karma goes into what's called stealth mode, and that means it's running on pure electric power. The only thing driving the car is the pair of electric motors in the back. The two of them together make a little over 400 horsepower, and there is no connection between the rear drive wheels and the gasoline engine up front. That gasoline engine is a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged motor from General Motors. Like all electrics, there's a wonderful seamless quality to the power delivery in this car. You squeeze down the accelerator and the Karma basically responds immediately. When we tested the Karma, we measured a 0 to 60 of about 6 seconds flat in sport mode with all the power, but in stealth mode, we only got about 7.5 seconds 0 to 60. Compared to a regular car in town, the Karma is very silent, and of course there's absolutely no gear changes. Like a typical electric car, it has no transmission. It's only a 1-speed, and therefore you never really feel any gear changes of any kind because there aren't any. Right now the Karma is running, though it's in electric mode, so not much is going on. But what's this I hear? This is a really bizarre noise coming from the back. I don't even know how to describe it. It's this alien cosmic hum. What it is Fisker's way of warning pedestrians that the car is approaching, because in electric mode it's really pretty quiet. And the sound comes out of a speaker underneath the back here, and there's another one in the front, and whenever you're below 40 or 45 miles an hour, it's there. And the first time you hear it, you just can't imagine what it is. On the highway, the Karma is very comfortable. Most of the time the ride is quite good, and the steering is excellent. There's really good on-center feel. You don't have to concentrate to keep it in your lane, and that's a pretty good thing because this is a very wide car, so you really do want to keep it between the white markers. Of course, the Karma ought to be pretty stable on the highway. It weighs just 3 pounds shy of 5,300 pounds. So a car with that much mass ought to be pretty good about going straight ahead. Now you might ask yourself how this car can possibly weigh 5,300 pounds. It has all aluminum construction, aluminum bodywork, doesn't even have a transmission. But we've got a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, and it's coupled to a very powerful generator. Then we have 2 electric motors in the back. They're not light. And then we have the battery that's in this central console, and it's pretty heavy as well. I mean, fundamentally, you have 2 complete powertrains in this car, and that ends up adding a lot of weight. Given that it weighs 5,300 pounds, the Karma feels pretty agile up here. I think it's got big tires that have a lot of grip. The steering ratio is designed to be fairly quick. The steering isn't too heavy, and the car does not feel like a 5,300 pound car. 5,300 pounds, that's what a Tahoe weighs, and there's no Tahoe ever went up this road like this. Our mileage, by the way, for the first 32 miles we've driven is about 120 miles per gallon. That's because most of those miles were driven on electricity. We've hardly used any gasoline so far. But with every mile we're using more gasoline and the mileage is falling. Now it may seem odd to talk about great mileage when we're talking about a $111,000 car. If you can afford to buy a car that expensive, the price of gas doesn't really matter very much to you. But there's a lot of people out there, both rich people and poor people, who care about the environment. And certainly you could make that environmental statement by buying a Toyota Prius. But the Karma does a few things the Prius doesn't. It's a lot faster, it's a lot more luxurious, it's a lot more impressive, it's a lot better looking. So if you care about those things and still want to make the environmental statement, this is the way to go. Just bring lots of cash. On the road, the Karma feels pretty big because it is pretty big. Compared to something like a Mercedes E-Class, the Karma is about 5 inches longer. More importantly, it's about 5 inches wider, and it's 5 inches lower. We put all that together, and that's where it gets those stunning, sexy proportions, where it's really low, it's really wide, it really looks stretched out. But it does fill up a lane pretty well. There's all this high-fashion couture design on the outside, and you get on the inside and there's a continuation of that, but following a sustainability mode. The interior of the Karma was designed to be ecologically friendly. Wherever you see wood in the Karma, it's reclaimed wood. It was either gotten from the remains of a forest fire in California or actually salvaged from the bottom of Lake Michigan. This is an EcoSport model of the Karma, and it uses a special leather that has not gone through the chrome tanning process that leaves so much toxic residue. It's a much cleaner process, and they think it produces a more natural looking leather. There's this cloth all over the interior of the Karma, and it's a very rich cloth. You can actually feel its nap where you touch it, you leave a little bit of a mark, almost like the grain of a lawn. I think it looks terrific, and it's also used here just to reduce the amount of plastic in the interior of this car. The driving position in this Karma is just terrific for me. There's an adjustable steering column, and my relationship between the wheel, the pedals, and the seat is as perfect as it gets. The other nice thing is I'm not a huge guy, so having kind of a cozy cockpit here feels good to me. This is just a cozy, comfortable, cool place. The interior finish is really unusual in this car. This use of cloth is very rare these days. The whole combination here, this nice leather that's up at the top of the dash, this cloth, this reclaimed wood, really produces a high-end, rich interior that's just very appropriate to a $100,000 car. The Karma has very few knobs and buttons on the dash. Most functions are controlled through the central LCD screen. Unfortunately, the layout, logic, and operation of this screen are really poor. Fisker people say they're working on a second-generation screen, and the car sure needs it. The view of the gauge cluster is just about perfect, but they're not real gauges. They're actually computer representations of gauges, and the one on the left is a speedometer like you've seen before. The one on the right shows you the amount of electrical charge you have, the amount of gasoline you have, and it also shows you how much power you're using or how much power you're regenerating if you're on the brakes. So it's a pretty simple gauge cluster, and it's very easy to understand. The downside of the high style is the space in the back seat. I'm back here behind the driver's seat, which is exactly where I left it when I got out of the front, and I hardly have enough room for my knees. The seat's all the way on the floor, and I can't put my shoes underneath the driver's seat, and my hair, such as it is into the headliner. This is really tight, and you start to understand why concept cars often get a little less sexy as they make it to production. This car didn't undergo that transition. And it's as sexy as a concept car, and in some ways it's as impractical as a concept car. On any four-door sedan, luggage capacity is important, so let's take a look at the Karma's trunk. It's actually pretty small. This is a 7 cubic foot trunk, and that's probably half the size of the next smallest trunk in the luxury car segment, and probably a third the size of many. The tight trunk is a reminder about how much hardware there is in the Karma. I mean, essentially it's got 2 complete powertrains, and they're crammed into every nook and cranny, and it just doesn't leave a lot of trunk space. The roof of every Karma is covered with solar cells. Now this looks like a lot of solar cells, but it really doesn't generate a lot of electricity. And that electricity does not go into the main battery that powers the car. The Karma still has a 12-volt battery that runs all the normal stuff on a car that the 12-volt battery runs, and that's what gets charged by these solar cells. It would really be nice if these solar cells could recharge the battery as the car was just sitting, but these solar cells have to get way more efficient for that to happen. The structure of the Karma is rock solid. I'm very impressed by the overall integrity and the lack of any kind of rattles or vibrations in the car. And it's particularly impressive because the Karma rides on giant 22-inch diameter wheels. That said, it's not the best riding car in the world. Because those tires are such low profile on such big wheels, the Karma lets you know immediately if you're on wrinkled pavement. So far we've covered about 110 miles today. We started out with a full charge, but the battery was used up by 27 or 28 miles. So the first thing I'm going to do when I get back to the hotel is get this thing plugged in to recharge for my next trip or for tomorrow morning. Now the hotel's got a 220 volt charge set up, which means that you can get a full charge in 5 to 6 hours. You can also plug it into a regular 120 volt outlet, but that takes a total of 15 hours. But one of the key things to remember about this plug-in hybrid or any plug-in hybrid is that the battery isn't that big. So whenever you have the opportunity to plug it in, you ought to do so because that maximizes the electric use of the car. I've now spent 3 days in the Karma, covered 266 miles, and I can say it's the perfect Hollywood car. It has high style, it has lofty environmental aspirations, and it reeks of luxury. The high style is amazing. I mean, this car stands out in traffic like a supermodel does at a Walmart. It just stops people. I had people pull up next to me pulling out their cell phone cameras to take pictures of the Karma. You have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get something in the Ferrari or Lamborghini range to stop traffic the way this Karma does, even in car-happy Los Angeles. The Karma is also very consistent with anyone who has environmental concerns. It's a plug-in hybrid, but it has that gasoline engine that keeps it going. It's sort of the perfect combination. And in fact, we've gotten 31 miles per gallon. Now, 31 isn't all that great, but this is a big, heavy, powerful luxury car. And in fact, none of the other luxury competitors can get 31 miles per gallon. So while it ain't a Prius, it's actually pretty good for what it is. And as a luxury car, it's got the look, it's got the interior finish, it has the materials. You get into a Karma and you feel like you're driving something very special. So what's the downside? Well, it's a Hollywood car, and some of the reality behind the facade isn't quite so good. For example, the high style is totally real, but you do pay for it a little bit. Rear seat is tight, the trunk space is tight. I mean, frankly, you can get into a Mercedes E-Class for barely more than half the money and have a much roomier and more practical luxury car than this one. The environmental part is much the same. The real benefit of the Karma depends on how you use it. If you tend to do a lot of short trips and you plug the Karma in religiously, well, it's going to spend most of its time on electric power and you'll hardly burn any gasoline. Legitimately great. On the other hand, if you go on long trips, well, there's only about 28 to 35 miles, depending on how you drive it, of electric range. And if you go on a 300-mile trip, most of that is going to be burning gasoline. And on gasoline, it doesn't get any better mileage than any of the competitors. So the environmental part is heavily dependent on your own duty cycle of the car. The Karma's performance is not bad, but when you compare it to luxury cars in its price class, close to $100,000, it's actually one of the slower ones out there. And when you're running on electric power, it's slower even still. So it doesn't really deliver on that front. Some of the other parts of the car, for example, the operation of the LCD screen and the entire telematics, are relatively primitive compared to where modern luxury cars actually are. Finally, when you're operating in the gasoline mode, once you've used up the electric power, or if you're in the sport mode because you want maximum performance, the car is just not as refined as modern luxury cars. You've got a 4-cylinder under the hood. When you start working that 4-cylinder, you hear it and you feel it, and it doesn't sound sweet or feel smooth. So in the end, if you're looking at a Karma, you've got to really decide what your priorities are. If your priority is style and impressing people, you can't do any better than this car, especially at its $100,000 price point. If you want an environmentally sensitive car, a hybrid that's actually a luxury car rather than a tiny little Econo box, again, the Karma is the only game in town. But if what you're looking for is a general luxury car and style and environmental aspects don't do much for you, you can do a lot better than the Karma for a lot less money. I'm Csaba Csere with Car and Driver. See you next time.